Welcome, listeners, to Lucky Episode 13 of Snippit Sports Science Podcast. This is Jared Coleman-Stark, today interviewing Chris Gaviglio on an article called Morning-Based Strength Training Improves Afternoon Physical Performance in Rugby Union Players. What do you think of this article, Chris?
This paper leads quite nicely on the one that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago. In that, in the last paper, we looked at how video clips can acutely improve testosterone concentrations and therefore performance. This one actually starts to look at how morning performance can improve something later in the afternoon. This whole group used the markers of salivary testosterone and cortisol quite a bit, and we actually find that's really nice markers. As I said in the last review that I did, testosterone correlates really well with performance markers of strength, speed, and power, but also the behaviours such as aggression and motivation, which are really important.
Okay, so this is sort of along our testosterone and cortisol theme of articles that we're looking at.
Yeah, exactly right. One thing this builds upon is recognizing that upon awakening, 30 minutes after awakening, you have your peak in T and C, and it actually naturally declines throughout the day. So it's the circadian rhythm. When you think about when we perform, we actually do most of our finals in the afternoons or the evenings. So when our testosterone is at our lowest. So if you remember, T correlates really well with strength, speed, and power. But if we're having our finals in the afternoon and the evenings, that could have some sort of impact on performance. Or in the case of these investigators, they actually see this as an area that they could actually try and improve performance by improving hormonal concentrations.
Okay, so how do we go about doing that?
They've actually looked at some other papers out there, such as there's a shot putting one where they do morning overheads, and they looked at shot putting performance in the afternoon and saw that there was a nice improvement. So they've actually looked upon that and tried to bring this into an elite population. In respect to these group of athletes, they looked at rugby union players because that's actually quite relevant. There's usually in a team, there's a lot of players. They're pretty fast, they're pretty strong. So it's a good cohort of athletes to use. So what they actually did in the study, they looked at 3 different types of interventions in the morning. In this case, it was control, so do nothing, sprinting, or a weight session, something quite heavy. All sessions were about 20 minutes in length, and then they looked upon how that would affect or improve performance in the afternoon.
Okay, so that's a pretty short, sharp stimulus in the morning. It's not a full session. It's a nice, quick little session to get you going.
Correct. Because what you've got to realise is that everything has a fatigue or a cost. So if you're going to be doing something in the morning and it's of too great a volume and the athlete's going to be fatigued, that's going to have great cost in the afternoon. So although hormonally it might actually improve performance, physically it may not actually show any improvement because they're just tired.
Right, makes perfect sense. You want something potentiating rather than fatiguing.
Correct. And traditionally we've seen potentiation to be in that short acute window of say 6 to 12 minutes. This is actually starting to look at something over 6 hours.
Okay. So they had 3 conditions, and what were some of the outcomes that they were looking at? Testosterone, cortisol?
Correct. And also in the afternoon, they looked at counter movement jump performance, peak power outputs, sprint performance over 40 meters, and also strength, 3RM squat and 3RM bench.
Okay, so very high-end performance there.
Exactly right.
And what did they find in those?
So the main findings of the study was that testosterone concentrations declined from the morning to the afternoon under the control and the sprint trials, but not following the weight conditions. The afternoon testosterone concentrations were lower in the control compared to the sprints and the weights, with greater testosterone concentrations following weights than sprints.
Okay, so sprinting won't overcome the circadian rhythm decline, but weights do?
Correct.
Interesting.
In respect to cortisol, the cortisol concentrations declined from morning to afternoon under all conditions.
Okay, and what did they find with those counter movement jumps, sprinting, and the 3RM test?
Participants lifted heavier 3RM bench press loads under the weights when compared with control and sprints, and also the same thing was seen with the back squats as well. Players produced greater lower body counter movement jump peak power under the weights than either the control or the sprints conditions. Doing weights produced a faster 40-metre sprint trial than the control and also the sprint trial. But it's also important to notice here that sprinting in the morning also improves sprinting in the afternoon compared to the control.
But just sprinting?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So that really shows the specificity of the type of stimulus. So once again, weights improved testosterone. It attenuated the decline in the circadian rhythm. Weights also improved all performance measures. Sprinting only improves sprinting. If we remember in the last paper we reviewed 2 weeks ago, we spoke about the specificity of the type of movement. And this once again shows that the specificity of type of potentiation in the morning, how that affects the afternoon.
Yeah, specificity is a very powerful principle.
Exactly right.
And did the researchers discuss why weights would have such an effect versus sprinting?
Specificity.
Yeah? Oh, okay. But the weights aren't specific to the sprinting, but the weights still see an improvement in sprinting.
In respect to that, the sprinting is not enough stimulus for the afternoon session. So we actually, and we've referred back to testosterone, we see that testosterone correlates well with strength, speed, power, but also the other markers such as motivation and aggression. So in sprinting, to run really fast, although you need to be aggressive, it's controlled aggression. You need fluidity when you run. When you're lifting weights, sometimes all you need is that all-out aggression when you're getting out of the bar and being able to push quite hard. So that's where the advantage of testosterone around those behavior measures can actually be used in this respect.
Okay, so it's a bit about that aggressive intensity as well.
Correct.
Any other large conclusions that they drew out of the study?
They really also emphasize that it no way argues for a causal relationship. So it could be actually just a reflective marker. So although testosterone may be higher, it may not be the mechanism, but it may just be a really good biomarker for performance and a marker of readiness to perform.
Absolutely, and that's what we see a lot in sports sciences. All the molecules that we talk about, they're not necessarily a signaling molecule all the time, although, of course, a hormone is explicitly a signaling molecule. But all the time, they're just a very good marker for what's happening.
Yeah, exactly right. I mean, there's so many other factors at play in terms of what may actually be improving performance. Another thing they spoke about is potentially core temperature. Were they able to increase core and also muscle temperature through the weight session? And then did they actually hold that through a little bit better to their afternoon performance as well?
Was that a measure that they had? Did they measure some temperatures in there?
No, but they actually mentioned that in the discussion. They thought that potentially that could be a good marker to investigate in future studies.
That is something that we see is often very central to performance, is just what temperature is the body at, what's the core temperature, what's the muscle temperature.
Yeah, and we reviewed that in previous papers as well when we looked at the role of muscle temperature and performance, and that feeds in really nicely with passive heat maintenance.
Any practical implications from the study?
They had 3 really main points, which sits quite nicely with me as well. The first one was just the awareness that the type of session performed during the morning may influence the afternoon competition performance. It's the individuality of that. The second one is the potential for fatigue. Sometimes we read stuff and we go, oh, we have to go out and do it. But we have to be conscious that what they do in the morning may have an effect to performance. Although we may think we're doing something good for them, potentially we may not be. And then also just the awareness that the application of the starter could be sport specific. What we're seeing for this group of athletes may only work for this group of athletes. So we need to be conscious of that as well.
Absolutely. That's a great wrap-up of the study, Chris. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
And thank you, listeners. This has been Snippit Sports Science Podcast. Visit us at our website, snippitscience.com. That's Snippit, SNIPPIT, science.com. Or follow us on Twitter at Snippit Science. Thank you.